How do you equip parents to teach their children that everyone who claims that they are a safe person, even when they're the pastor or the friend of the family, may not be safe?
This past week, CT reported that the former pastor of one of the biggest churches in Texas has pled guilty to child sex abuse in a case that took place over 30 years ago. Robert Morris, the founder of Gateway Church on the outskirts of Dallas, will serve 6 months in jail under a 10-year suspended sentence, report CT, register as a sex offender, and pay survivor Cindy Clemishire $270,000. The conviction of Morris arrived in the headlines in the same week that President Trump has said he would consider the pardon of Ghislaine Maxwell, who is currently serving a prison sentence for soliciting and grooming girls for abuse by Jeffrey Epstein. It's a clash of headlines that prompts us to ask the question, what is a child worth in American culture today? Joining us to explore this and other related questions is CT's editorial director of news, Kate Shellnutt, who has reported extensively on the Robert Morris case, and our own COO, Nicole Martin. Ladies, thanks for joining Russell and me today.
Thank you.
Kate, we don't hear a lot about pastors going to jail for child sex abuse. This seems a little bit unusual. Why is that?
Right. I think when I think of all the cases of people I've talked to, met, read about, who have come forward to report abuse that took place, especially when they were children years ago, a lot of times they can't even hold out hope for an outcome like this, for a settlement, and for a guilty conviction. A lot of times they're just looking for someone to listen and believe them. And they're also looking for maybe if the pastor's still in ministry, for him to be removed. But because of the time that passes between when a lot of times victims are adults before they feel comfortable coming forward, we know on average it's something like in their 40s and 50s. Sometimes their abusers might be dead by then, and sometimes they're way past that statute of limitations. So in the case of Robert Morris, we had a attorney general in the state of Oklahoma where these crimes took place who really kind of bended the rules and kind of made this happen for this victim, Cindy Clemishire, where they said because Robert Morris, who was visiting as a traveling preacher when the abuse took place, wasn't a resident of Oklahoma, they kind of suspended the years so that she was able to move forward with criminal charges against him. Whereas if that exception hadn't have been in place, I think it runs out when you're like 48 in Oklahoma. That they only give you a certain window. And so we see the action here legally allowing this to move forward. And it felt really exceptional to me. But then even within the past couple months, I've started to see 2 or 3 other cases, one in Kentucky, one in Florida, where abuse in the 80s has resulted in criminal convictions and jail time. And that's because of reform of statutes of limitations, that we're starting to see the legal landscape really change. And I think whereas in the past survivors wouldn't have had hope of this happening, I think this really opens the door to the fact that, oh, maybe I do have a legal pathway here for what happened to me.
CT reported that initially elders at Morris's church said they believed that it was an extramarital relationship with a young lady, not with a 12-year-old. And they said that Morris had already undergone restoration and they have since apologized for that characterization. But Kate, in your experience of reporting on stories like this, how does a 12-year-old girl get mistaken for a woman?
Well, I remember when I originally read this, it felt so familiar, especially because this happened, the story came forward June 2024, and we were just maybe 6 months out from when Mike Bickle, who was the head of IHOP, International House of Prayer in Kansas City, had a similar case with, I think, a 12-year-old girl, his babysitter, who was repeatedly molested and forced sexually with him. And I thought, gosh, it's the same thing in the same time period and same high-level leader. Here we go again. And it's the same response from the church where it says, oh, he's confessed, he's repented. And because I think the lack of sensitivity that we had towards clergy sexual abuse and abuse at that time decades ago, or even if we just think back 5-10 years ago in our own scope of coverage, that there wasn't a need to really press and ask a lot of questions. And so I think when people say, hey, I confessed, I dealt with that, people were happy to leave it at that. and not go any further. Whereas now I think we've seen too many examples of how this has played out that I think any smart church, when they learn about one, they're going to be looking for incidents in someone's past. And when they learn, they're going to ask the questions of how old was this person and how do we know? And let's get someone to verify it and not go by just the pastor's account.
The AP reported that Morris's attorneys basically said that the former pastor had pled guilty just to end the whole thing. The attorney said that while he believed that he had long since accepted responsibility in the eyes of God and that Gateway Church was a manifestation of that kind of acceptance, that Robert Morris readily accepted responsibility in the eyes of the law. Russell and Nicole, what is this? Is this an apology? Is it a confession? How do we receive words like this?
Well, it doesn't seem like an apology or a confession when someone just wants to get beyond it. I was really kind of struck by Cindy's recounting of what happened in the courtroom, and the question was asked of her, did Robert Morris or his family at any point, did they look remorseful? Did they look at you? She said at no point during her testimony, as she described what happened to her at 12 years old, at no point was there any eye contact, and at no point was there a confession. And again, I think when we get into this professionalization of ministry and this elevation of the senior pastor, particularly in mega churches, there's a sense that the victim is always the pastor, even when the pastor is wrong. So there is no need for, in their kind of, the way that they've constructed their kingdom, there's no need for that quote unquote king to apologize, because in their minds, let's just get this over with. I am so grateful for Cindy's courage, and I'm so grateful for the way that she was willing to speak to her accuser. I thought to myself, do you know how many hours of counseling it took for her to do that?
Yeah.
And he couldn't even acknowledge that she was in the room. I mean, the detail that she had to go through and relive. So no, I don't think this was an apology. I do think this was a get it over with. And unfortunately, if evangelical history proves itself to be right, he's likely to get out and start another church. So, I mean, I don't know what we do with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my friend Nancy French posted on social media yesterday comments on I believe it was the 700 Club news article on this from Christians talking about Robert Morris as the victim, blaming this 12-year-old girl for the way that she acted or the way that she dressed or the way the sort of ugliness, the kind of misuse of passages such as touch not mine anointed as a way to say that a pastor has a free pass at predatory behavior, and a sense of lashing out at a 12-year-old girl. I mean, the way that the Bible speaks about those who make idols become like them. We see that over and over and over again, and we're seeing it right now. So when Nicole says, wouldn't be surprised if after he gets out of jail, he's not starting another church. Well, of course, we've seen Robert Morris himself taking pastors who were not for these reasons, but who were clearly biblically disqualified from ministry and giving them the relaunch pad to be back in the ministry again. And I think that anybody who's looking at this will see that often there's almost a mutual blackmail, for lack of a better word, sort of club among people who know the dirt on each other, but are able to help them parachute back in, and that's a disgrace to the name of Jesus Christ and a disgrace to the glory of the church.
Kate, what other responses have you seen to this conviction?
Well, I think that for the survivor community, they don't get a lot of wins. And I think that they're really encouraged to see something come of this. Wartburg Watch, which is kind of the longtime watchdog blog that accounts and shares accounts of sexual abuse in ministry, that they've seen their profile rise because they were the first to platform online Cindy Clemenshire's story. So I think that they're happy for many people who have not seen their own predator or the person that they have accused suffer any sort of consequences, that they're glad to see one of their own, because it is a real community online, get her day in court, get to make that statement, and to underscore what Nicole said, like for the courage that we get to see from victims, it's like the tip of the iceberg. The number of emails and pleas that they've had to send to leaders over the years. We now know that Clemenshire had contacted Gateway about Robert Morris like from the beginning, as well as her father and her family's efforts to raise awareness at the start. So this is the end of a very, very long journey, both fighting it and then personally dealing with it. And I say the end, but it's a milestone in that. So I think that for survivors, they're really happy to see what they think should be happening when people come forward, but that really we don't have a ton of examples to point to. We have a lot more examples, right, where the church downplays it, where the person resumes ministry either there or in another setting and does not suffer the criminal consequences just because the law won't allow it. So for this to happen, I think that they're really happy that at least one person has had it played out maybe as it should, even decades later.
Well, and the tragic part about this is we would wish that what had happened was that the church took this seriously and the church led the accountability for this, and then the civil authorities took it seriously instead. It seems to be the other way. Where the church is doing as little as possible for as long as possible, and the civil authorities are the ones who actually have to pursue justice. That should not be the way that it is, and it's really a tragedy that should cause us all to say in our churches, how do we make sure that doesn't happen? Not just in response, but in anticipation of when and if this sort of horrible abuse of our pulpit happens. How do we respond immediately where we're making sure that there's accountability, not leaving it only to the state? The state has to do it, but the church does too. And when we're lagging behind, that's a terrible testimony.
Nicole, a lot of congregations have instituted safe church policies that they feel kind of prevents this sort of thing from ever happening. But we know that there is no procedure or policy that can offer ultimate protection. Talk me through the other things that a church needs to introduce into its culture to protect the vulnerable within it.
Yeah. I mean, let's back up and remember that this assault, the beginning of the sexual abuse began in the home. Robert Morris was in the home for Cindy's family. And, we assume that when you walk through the doors of this church, you're going to be safe. But really, it's the people within the church that we need to teach in school and develop and disciple on what safety looks like. I think this is absolutely a discipleship problem. But I also think we have to remember that the church is a hospital, and that hospital doesn't mean that the staff and the pastors are the doctors and the experts and the rest of us are the victims. It means that all of us wrestle with sin, and all of us need spaces for accountability. And I don't want to be the broken record on accountability, but we have lost that sacred art of accountability. It is rare that you see churches now that even have someone on staff for HR. And when there is no HR, then there is no place to go if you are a staff member and you need desperate help, or you're seeking to report something, or dare I say, become a whistleblower in the church. So churches need to think about their staff makeup. Who on the staff is paid to protect the employees and to hear when complaints come from the employees or the congregations. The second thing is we need to really rethink the background checks that go into ministry. I've always been a part of churches where background checks are done on the children's ministry. But who does the background check on the elders and the deacons and the ministers? And how often should we renew that? There are some denominations that require a renewal every year or every 2 years. The AME Church requires a renewal every year. But even that doesn't seem to be enough. So then there comes to that next level, and it goes back to this kind of I guess it was a 1990s kind of stranger danger teaching even within the family. So the question is, how do you equip parents to teach their children that everyone who claims that they are a safe person, even when they're the pastor or the friend of the family, may not be safe? And this is what I think we are rapidly trying to unpack right now. In a world of rampant social media, where children are being desensitized from things that are scary or things that should cause a discernment, when, the way that we allow ourselves to show up in the world is so subjective, how do we teach children, boys and girls, to detect what feels unsafe, whether that's in the church or the home? And that's what I'm trying to wrestle with right now. I think there are lots of ways to do that. There's no one silver bullet, but we've got to start there. We need to teach parents and church leaders how to teach our young people to detect a lack of safety. And then the last part of this is, what happens when the lack of safety is in the home? When it is a lack of safety in the family structure, we've got to create systems where children especially can come and find a safe place outside of the family when that's not always the case. So lots of work to do.
Nicole, you talked about accountability, and I think about, we've seen obviously abuse and child abuse take place across types of churches, but I think about how many cases it is where a person is kind of out on their own and not within a structure. So, right, Robert Morris in this case was like a traveling itinerant preacher. So, like, who is he accountable to? Who would you even report to? And I think of the same case with missionaries, with people who have very loose affiliations, that you wonder, who is the oversight for these people? And then when a case of abuse does come up, when reports and allegations do arise, who wants to own those? And I've seen a few cases, even just within the past year, where a denomination will say, oh, it wasn't our guy, or a church will say it wasn't our guy. And the victim will say, it sure seemed like it was to me. You seemed like the person I wanted to tell. Why haven't you done anything? And no one kind of wants to own the accountability process. So I think that that's a factor here.
So we have this news we're processing about Robert Morris. And then on Monday, President Trump says that he will consider pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell, the sidekick of Jeffrey Epstein, who's currently in prison for assisting him with sexually abusing girls. Which brings me back to my initial question in this segment. Russell, what is a child worth in American culture today? Apparently
not very much, because when we actually get to the question of what are we going to do, we end up repeatedly with this mentality that says everything else comes before that. Mm-hmm. And you have people, whether in churches or in countries or other places, able to just sort of, everybody's got problems when you're dealing with this sort of predatory behavior, and even classifying, we will be outraged when a child is being destroyed by somebody who's in a different church or in a different political party, but not when it's my people and my tribe. That tells you the concern is not for children, it's for something else.
Kate, as you think about the scope of your reporting, we know these attitudes toward vulnerable children, toward sexual abuse, they aren't unfortunately new. We saw them in the Catholic Church scandals that began to be exposed in the early 2000s. But you also talked about how some of the legal structures seem to be changing. Why do you think attitudes are so slow to change? And what do you think could, so to speak, put a foot on the gas pedal to make things move more quickly?
I don't know. So I haven't thought about I've just known that it's a reality that the attitudes are slow. I think when I think about it now, especially when I think about what I've done in my reporting and what I know from my own church, is that at a certain point, it feels like none of us are more than 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from someone who has been a victim of child sexual abuse, whether that's in our families or in our church communities, or if it's cases of people we've known, a leader we've followed has been accused. I just feel like the issue is just becoming closer to people. And once you see that and it kind of breaks your paradigm of what you might have thought that system looks like, or what a victim looks like, or what they deserve. And so I think as more and more people hear the stories, and I mean, that's the goal of survivors and elevating their stories, there's more of an urgency behind, let's really do something. And I think there was a time where all incidences of clergy sexual abuse, even with minors, were seen as, well, let's do a kind of two people sinned here, and or even blame the girl. And I think that's completely shifting. I think that any reasonable Christian, anyone listening to this podcast, if we said a pastor had sex with someone under 18, I don't think that they would have further questions about whether that was appropriate or whether the pastor is the one who's responsible in that situation. And that's a real change. And I think as that goes on, there will be a much more sensitive care towards the nature of abuse, towards the nature of power, and then towards how we handle it and find justice in the legal system. So I think we're kind of catching up with the instincts that we've all kind of come to know in our hearts of like what is right and wrong and what our obligations are to people who have received treatment that they don't deserve, and that has such deep and lasting effects on their lives.
As we close, Nicole, I want to go back to something that you said earlier about the kind of paradigm shifting that needs to happen, because we are all complicit to some extent in American culture in these attitudes that blur the line between adults and children. From fashion to media consumption, there is a shifting that has happened over the years that blurs that line. And we often impart a lot more to our children, perhaps, than we ought. What do you think the church can uniquely offer here to distinguish adults and children in ways that will protect them from harm?
Oh my goodness, there's so much. I mean, I immediately think of the story of Jesus calling the children to him. He centers the children in the story. Suffer the children not, don't keep them from coming to me. If Jesus centers children in the gospel story, it is time for us to take on that narrative and center children. And what does that look like? That looks like creating spaces for children to just be children. They do not have to buy into the skincare regimen. Oh my gosh, if I hear another 10-year-old of my daughter's friends talk about her skincare regimen, I'm going to be like, I'm going to lose my mind. Wash your face. You're beautiful. You're going to be fine. But because, going back to the question of what's the value of children in our society, society sees children as commodities, as people to buy over. That's why the cereal is in the lower level. That's why the commercials are geared toward them. That's why Halloween marks the beginning of commercials geared to children so they know what to put on their Christmas lists. But it is our job to guard the sanctity of childhood. And I do hope that those listening, if this conversation has been triggering for you, because sometimes listening to assault from someone else's experience can trigger your own memories, I do hope that someone listening to this would feel empowered to know that you were a victim, that what happened to you was wrong, that you can get help, and that Cindy's story says there's still hope for redemption. And I hope that parents like myself will continue to do whatever it takes to preserve the sanctity of childhood, to let kids color and not just be on Roblox, to let kids, have a space to dream and play without being influenced by the things around them. And, I wrestle with, does this make me more of a helicopter parent? Maybe, but if it means that I'm going to be intentional about discipling my children, growing them up in the light and the glory of Christ, so that they'll know evil when they see it, then that's what I want to be about. And that's what I would hope we can encourage others to do as well.
Listeners, we know conversations like this can be tough, and it can be hard to find others who will wrestle with these ideas alongside you. We are grateful that you join us each week for just that. Honest grappling with current events and issues that are shaping our world and our hearts. We want to give a shout out today as we close to Kit Brogan, who wrote to us to share his favorite segment from a recent episode. Kit, look for Bulletin swag headed your way. And listeners, keep those emails coming to podcasts@christianitytoday.com. We would love to hear from you, and we'll see you next time. Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.